Hey, Luther, greetings.
Hey Doug, how are you?
I'm good, man. Glad we could set up your IC, get that hooked up, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, I saw you joined us. Haven't seen you in a bit. Maybe that's just on me, but glad to have you on board. And Laura, welcome to you, one of our newest.
Hi, thank you.
We usually spend a few minutes letting other folks pop in, drop in, and give it just a couple minutes at the top of the hour here as we get going. But always like to open up the mic in the early days. Hey, Mark, how are you, man?
I'm good, Doug. How are you?
Good, good. And what I was saying is, we always like to have the mic a little bit open. If anybody's got any updates, thoughts, or anything they'd like to share as we get going. Puneet, good to see you, sir. How's your deal doing?
I guess the question is which one?
I know you're a busy man. You got what, three that I know of, maybe?
Well, I've canceled a bunch of them. I was scrambling to see if I had to write an LOI and having not finished the training, but thankfully the diligence process you guys had taught me to look for kind of, said like doesn't make sense to go through with the process for some of these things. So, and if there's something in my gut that's saying something just seems off, and the last thing I'll say is in speaking to an SBA lender, they actually were incredibly insightful and said, I would not do this deal if I were you. And so that was like, oh, they just earned my trust that way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I know every one of those guys in the SBA realm that I would count as credible and good. They'll be the first to tell you if they see some angles on it that they don't like or not comfortable with. They'll be pretty vocal about that.
The only other update I'll say is, and maybe I don't know if this just happens to be me being in Washington State or the lack of knowledge or exposure that I have. The SBA lenders I've spoken with so far have said, oh, you're trying to buy a business in sector X. Your resume screams of sector Y, and it doesn't make, I can't draw a dotted line. So that was news to me, which means like, oh, am I really limited to buying in my background sector when I don't think this other sector is rocket science? So that's with a few lenders I've spoken to so far. So that was just exposure for me, and shame on me for not realizing that. But
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and let me address that a little bit. We have had that come up before, and I think inevitably it's a symptom of the way the resume and profile might be styled. If it's a little too heavy on the technical expertise of an industry, you might want to leverage more on like team leading, team building, development of new lines of business and things of that sort, and kind of slow play or back off on the in what might otherwise be very impressive technical acumen and background and ability, but really lean in on the leadership opportunities you might have had, the size and scope of departments you might have run or teams you might have run, or for that matter, projects you might have led, because it's that kind of direct leadership skill and background that's going to win the day in taking over some of these businesses, because these SBA guys know that what you've got when you walk into one of these businesses, you've got a room full of smiling faces, and how do you relate to those guys, and what are you going to do with that? That's the ultimate question.
Yeah, I mean, all of us are in sector X and trying to buy in sector Y right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the whole point of us joining Acquira. If we were already plumbers or HVAC owners, like we wouldn't be in Acquira.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. If you were already in the sector, you really wouldn't need us to help you get there. But occasionally we do talk about that when we do our investment committee calls, because there's a section in the IC pitch deck that does talk about your fit as the potential owner of that business. And the story that gets told there is ultimately what you're going to want to be telling the SBA lender. And I know it's a delicate balance between trying to get pre-qualified with an SBA lender and just having a general discussion about, hey, here am I, here's what I'm looking at doing, versus trying to get deal specific and saying, no, this is the deal I want, and here's why I think I can be the guy. Dick, you've helped a lot of people get over the SBA hurdle on subjects like that. What do you see in that solution?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of SBA lenders paint people in the same box. They've read the statistics, and one of the reasons a lot of businesses fail is because the person that owns it or running it doesn't have a level of expertise in that industry. And there's some industries that are pretty specific. You have to have a little bit of an understanding or background, or you're probably not going to be successful. So yeah, I agree with Doug. I think you need to play out the fact that whether it's a HVAC company or whether it's a lawn care company or whether it's an Ace Hardware store, your leadership, your ability to run a business, put a team together, your knowledge of the financials, all of that stuff overweighs the fact whether you have experience or not in the industry.
Yep. We just, to your point, Luther, everybody we've got is coming at this with not direct experience in doing what they're doing. I mean, picking on him, but Kevin Cooper, our plumbing company owner, he came out of wealth management. And I mean, like, okay, where did the dots connect for that? Well, where they connected was, to Dick's point, where they connected was, familiarity with the numbers, understanding how to look at the financial side of the business. But Kevin also had some background with building teams and building branch offices for this wealth management network he was part of. And he really stressed that part of his background, not the fact that he had a Series 7 license or any of that junk that goes with it. But it was more like, I built 4 expansion offices for this company, so.
Doug and I are associated with a group, and there used to be a guy that he would quote this a number of times. 80% of every business is exactly the same. It's that 20% that makes you a little bit different. And I think that's a true statement. I think, you all got to have numbers, you all got to have legal aspects, you all got to have workers, you all got to have, everything that goes with running a business. It's that 20% that's a little bit different in this business than it is in that business. So if you can go to the table with 80% of anything, I think you got a winning combination.
Yep. Okay, well, let's lean into our subject matter. And I know I was not able to be on last week's call, but Dick and Dana brought to us a discussion about working capital, and we're going to continue on with wrapping up parts of that, I guess, Dick, but also more importantly, lean into something Dick has presented to us, a 13-week cash flow model. And I'll talk more about how that has been applied and received in the market. But Dick, you want to take over?
Yeah, and just kind of a little recap for those of you who weren't on the call last week, or if you forgot about it already, or some of the issues. But one of the key things that we alluded to last week was cash is king. And I think that's a good thing to write down and stamp on your forehead, because if you don't have the cash, you're not going to be able to pay your bills. Another point that we made and talked a little bit about was that not all assets are created equal. And what we mean by that is cash is something you can always use and pay people, but you can't pay your workers with an accounts receivable. They're not going to take that. They can't take that accounts receivable to the grocery store and make their car payment with it. So not all assets are created equal. You need to have a plan in place for if you are going to run out of cash, you're going to have a cash shortfall, and when it's going to happen. Bankers hate surprises, and the last thing you want to do is go to them on Monday morning and say, hey, guess what? I've got a whole bunch of checks coming in. I know I don't have any money in my checking account. That's not going to go over very, very big. You want to at least have, as Doug mentioned, a 13-week look-see, anticipate when that's going to happen. Go to your banker or whoever's providing you some cash and say, hey, I've got a shortfall here. Here's when it's going to happen. Here's how much it's going to be, and I need your help. So again, don't wait to the last minute because bankers really hate surprises. The other thing we talked a little bit about is that there's a good chance that the in-house accounting staff at whatever company that you buy have probably never worked through cash flows or even understand the difference between cash flows and working capital. The owner has probably had it all upstairs here in his head. He knows that in January, the cash register doesn't ring as much as it does in the other months. So he's going to preserve a little cash. And that's information that you're not going to have when you first take over the business. So it's good to have some of these tools in place so that you don't have a surprise, so that you can better manage and control your business. So with that being said, that's just kind of some high-level overviews, and let's get into now this model that Doug was referring to. And basically, I've talked about this before in these meetings, and I didn't have any examples put in here. It was just, a big spreadsheet with all these columns and no numbers in here. So it was kind of taunting when you looked at it and you said, oh my gosh, this looks very confusing. So I went through and I populated some of these fields so that you could kind of see what it looks like. And I particularly put a couple of areas in color so that they're easy to fill out, and you can just start with your 13 weeks up here. And I usually use a Monday date because that's a good time to figure out what you're going to do for the week. So what usually your payroll is going to be every week between office staff and outside workers. You typically have to pay as an employer a portion of Social Security and a portion of Medicaid, Medicare. So that's 7.65% of whatever your salaries is. So that's where that number comes from. You probably have got workers' comp insurance that you got to pay, and I just put it in here as being paid on a weekly basis to coincide with the payroll. And then you've probably got some other insurance. You got auto insurance or maybe builder's insurance or hazard insurance. And I just put in here that you're paying a couple of $1,000s a month and $1,000 each week. Rent is something that you got to pay. And I just put that's paid at the beginning of the month. You can see I put in the beginning of the month on each one of these. And then your telephone bill is probably going to average around $300. Your utilities maybe $150. You may pay somebody to do your outside that comes in and looks at your books. You probably got a contract with that, so you know when you pay that. And then you may have corporate credit cards that people use for fuel and have toll taxes on roads. And you're going to pay that credit card bill every month. Then I just put the first of the month, and it averages about $1,000 a month. And then instead of getting down into the 20 or 30 categories that you may have on your income statement, just take these big ones here that you need to pay to keep the lights on and keep people working. and just take all the other expenses, tally them up, and look at a couple of months history and see how much you had to pay on those other expenses on a weekly basis, and then factor that in going across. Then I always just put in $500 for 1,000 for miscellaneous, because you know you're going to have something that's going to come up that you didn't plan on, and it's nice to know that you've got something set aside for that instead of trying to pull it from some other source. So once you start doing this, if you populate this field or these fields, you can see it kind of starts filling in, and these things are repetitious, so you don't have to make changes to them. And then another category that's going to probably be the same as your loan payments. We put in here SBA, $10,000 a month, and you pay it the first week of the month. And then maybe the seller's got a note and you pay him $2,000 at the beginning of the month. So again, you populate those fields. You don't have to populate them every week. You've got them populated for the whole 13 weeks. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier, and it doesn't make this thing look like a four-headed monster. It's only a two-headed monster. So now you start with your starting cash for the week, $100,000. You can get this figure outstanding checks two ways. You can either say, okay, I'm going to use my online banking report, and I see that there's these checks that haven't cleared yet. They will be clearing, and so that'll be $10,000 that comes off what you've got in your bank account. Or you can use the balance on your general ledger for cash. That balance should already have the checks you've written taken into consideration. So you can eliminate one of the processes just by using the cash available as your cash available in your general ledger account. So now you look at the people that you expect to get payment from the work that you've done previously. So I just listed a couple of companies here and this happens to be a HVAC company, and I just put $25,000 are going to pay us this week, and next company is going to pay 15. And you probably got some history of the smaller accounts that pay on a weekly basis. So you may have a contract that you go out to a restaurant chain and you do various things all the time. And so you kind of know what those sales are going to come in at just based upon historical facts. Then the first week you get 55,000 historically, second week you get 35, and the third week you get 45.5 or 47.5. So now you've come up here with how much you're going to get this first week, and that totals $90,000. So you've got 90,000 in starting cash. You got receivables that you're going to collect of 95. So you've got $185,000 to pay your bills. So here's the bills you got to pay this week, and they come up to $42,367. And then you've got people that you bought things from, the vendors, suppliers, and you've got their bills to pay this week. So you figure out what those are going to be. And in this example, it comes up to $65,500. And then you got your loan payments you got to make. So your total disbursements are paying all these payments, paying your suppliers, paying the loan payments, subtracting that $119,000 from the $185,000 that you had. So you wind up with cash, a positive cash flow of $65,000 to carry over to the next week. So you had a good week. So you take that 65 and you put it back up here at the top as your beginning cash flow for that next week. Again, you take the outstanding checks that you have outstanding. Now you've got some different receivables coming in. You've got less bills to pay because you paid your rent and you paid some of these beginning of the month bills. So now you've got some other suppliers though that you've got to pay. And so you've got $90,000 worth of payments to make to them. You don't have any loan payments to make, but you can see based upon, even though your expenses were less, you're paying more to your suppliers. You had less cash going into the month, so you've got an ending balance of a negative $10,000, well, $9,000. So how do you cover that? Well, hopefully you got a line of credit, and so you call the bank up and say, hey, I need to put $10,000 in my account. They put 10,000 in, so you take the negative number that you got, 10,000 positive, you carry that figure up, so you got $991, and you just repeat the exercise over again. And as you can see, you come up with a negative 19. So again, you call up your friendly banker and ask him to advance 20. How you can use this thing, though, if you don't have a line of credit, and you look at this and you say, oh my gosh, I've got, $30,000 here in the next 3 weeks that I've got to come up with. So you go back up to your receivables list and you say, okay, let's look and see who I can call up that usually pays every 60 days and see if I can get them to give me half of the money now or half of it in 30 days, so I don't have all of that money hanging out there that isn't cash. You also look down here at who you've got to pay, and you can say, okay, Fred's AC parts, call up Fred or see if you can just pay him $25,000 this week instead of 50. And so then that turns all of this stuff positive. So that's how you can use this cash flow, and you can manage it even though you don't have a line of credit. The other thing that I found real eye-opening to some business people that have never done this before is that once you populate this field here with all the green numbers and you look at the total, you can pretty much say that, okay, I've got to do, what's that, I got to do about $150,000 a month to make these payments. So it kind of gives you an idea of what you got to do sales-wise or collection-wise to make all these payments. Because again, these people are people that you got to pay in cash. They're not going to take an IOU or accounts receivable billing statement as payment. So this thing is a really good tool, as Doug mentioned, and it can be very helpful to you in knowing where you are cash-wise, knowing, and you get out here in this number, if it keeps getting red, you may need $100,000 or you may need $200,000. But again, this also is great in budgeting time. When you start doing a budget for next year, you can look and you can see when these big payments are due, like on insurance, and you can start plugging those in various periods so that you can even do a better job of budgeting and forecasting going forward. So I'm going to stop there and just see if this is something that y'all would find useful. If you have any questions, if you have any thoughts or ideas, or if you want to add anything, Doug.
Well, let me jump in and say that, yeah, I alluded to the fact that Dick has shared this with several of our AEs who have recently closed on businesses, and it has been a really meaningful and critically important tool to help protect from, sudden surprises and shocks that you didn't anticipate. And in the early going, after you take over a business, sometimes these numbers are a little hard to get out of the system. But the more you can do to really determine the source of truth on where these numbers are, where they sit, and how they come together, the better visibility you're going to have. And the two things that I think are important that Dick mentioned here, you can try to manage this on the top side, which is talking to customers who owe you money, and see if there's not ways that they can expedite the payment or split the payment in a way that gets you a little more cash sooner rather than later. Or the flip side is, if you've got high dollars going out to vendors, you might want to really be able to focus your time not just on the pay timing, but when you look at enough history, you actually can hit up some of these vendors and say, you know, this company's been dealing with you for a long time, and, you know, can we do some price adjusting here? Can we just bring the whole number down a little bit over time? And that is not uncommon as we see these businesses coming together. The owner seller maybe has never tried to renegotiate his supply price. He's just accepted whatever the vendors have given him. He's never tried to take advantage of his own loyalty toward those vendors. And it's not that the vendors are trying to get to you, you know, in a dishonest way. It's just that if you don't ask them, they're not necessarily going to volunteer a price cut. So it's worth having those discussions. And I think we had a hand raised. Can we get this shared? Yes, Dick will share that with us here in the. We'll get this put into one of the share folders we've got and give you a link for it.
The other thing that you can do with this too is that you see this $12,000 a month that you're paying out here. Well, when you talk to your SBA lender up front, when you get your loan approved, SBA has some guidelines and some rulings on when you have to start making payments. And if you don't ask for any concessions, they're going to put the payment 30 days after you sit down and sign all the papers. Well, stop and think about that. 30 days is not enough time for you to probably get a handle on how to turn the key in the front door. You're going to be drinking out of a fire hose. So you may want to ask the SBA lender up front and say, hey, it's going to take me a little while to get my arms around everything. Can we make that first payment due in 60 days or 90 days? So, you know, if you had that in this option, you could immediately save yourself $40,000, and you can see these figures now turn red or black real easy because you're not paying out that loan payment. So again, the only thing I can say is no, but at least it gives you a little bit of a breathing room cycle until you have to start making that big payment.
Well, and you know, this is another tool to use, because when you think about your sort of budget and planning, and a couple of examples that come to mind is people that have moved into these businesses, maybe one of the first things they want to do in the early going is like, if you've got a plumbing company, maybe you're wanting to refresh the wrap on the trucks, because you might have a new phone number or a new website, or maybe even you change the name of the business, which I don't necessarily highly recommend. That's another whole discussion. But still, you might want to refresh the branding on the truck. Well, that's a capital expense. And the question is, where's that money coming from? Ideally, you want to be able to pay out of cash flow if at all possible. But if you don't have everything accounted for and forecast this way, you don't know if you've got any surplus to work with or not. You may look at the first 6 weeks and say, oh, this all looks good, but then there's some event or something happening out at week 7 and 8, and it makes a big drain on your cash. And to go spend $40,000 rebranding your trucks might not be in the cards right now, or
Yep.
you're gonna have to pay for that a different way. You may have to.
And that can hold true too, Doug, when you want to add an employee.
Yeah.
And so let's say you look at this thing and you look at the bottom line and you say, whoa, wait a minute. We can't hire Fred till out here because we don't have we're already running in the red, but we get this big receivable over here. We can hire Fred in week 13 and not week 4. So yeah, you can do the same thing with employee hires.
Yeah. And I think the thing I have found really important about looking at a 13-week horizon. If if you do the simple math, that's a quarter of the year, and if you keep it on a rolling basis, you can account for seasonality in your business. You can account for receivable hiccups. Some of you have been here long enough, you know the story. I know we got a lot of people on today's call that are new to us. I'll tell you a quick story. We had one owner buy a business, and mysteriously, for no real good reason they could easily identify, their receivables, their incoming payment flow just dried up for almost 90 days. They didn't get a single check in the mail. And they were calling customers, and customers saying, "No, I mailed that check. I know I mailed that check. I know I mailed that check." Well, one day, and by the way, the aggregate mounted up to almost $400,000 of receivables that they weren't getting payment on. It was basically the whole company. Now, fortunately, it was a partnership. The two gentlemen that owned the business had set aside a rainy day fund, and they had to immediately tap into it to keep the bills going, the green numbers on Dick's sheet here. But one day a mail truck drove up to the business and brought in like 8 tubs of mail, those giant plastic baskets. They said, "We're sorry, these all got lost in our shop. These are all yours." And it was all their checks. It was literally about $400,000 worth of payments that arrived in a 30-minute window. Now, the next immediate challenge they had, as you can imagine, they had to get on the phone and call the customers and say, "Okay, we got this check, but is it still a good check?" We're not going to just process it automatically because we don't want to start bouncing a bunch of checks out of the bank in deposits. And, customers were saying, yeah, it's still good. It's still good. So they were able to recover their money in about a 48-hour window. But that's a tremendous extreme. In all of my banking days, I had never heard of that ever happening anywhere, not like that. But the point being, weird things can happen. And the more visibility you've got on your numbers, you can be a lot more proactive on being able to manage it and deal with it.
Yep, good point.
So thoughts and comments. Anybody have any questions for Dick?
Hello, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, is this something that you could, it looks like this is something that you would utilize after you've purchased a business. Would you try to utilize this before you're doing the business or before you bought the business during like the due diligence period, so you could kind of like estimate some of the costs? So it could help you determine like how much working capital you might need to when you buy the business. And I don't know if this is a question for Dick, but just in general, whoever can answer, is that something you could work into the negotiations when you're trying to buy the business?
Well, keep in mind that this will never really balance anything. It's a cash flow projection based upon historical data. And I've worked with some accountants, in-house accountants that have tried to put this together, and they've tried to balance it to the penny. And they just start pulling their hair out. It's something that really shouldn't and can't be balanced to the penny. It's just, general amounts like the $23,000 I had in there for payroll. Well, I didn't take into consideration, somebody doesn't work. You're paying some of your workers by the hour, and you have 3 or 4 people that are out sick and they don't work. So that pay may not be 23, it may be 22, and then you pay somebody a bonus, maybe 24. So it's never really going to balance anything. It's just estimates all the way across. So it'd be very difficult to go back and get historical projections. What you can do is you can ask for your monthly financials so that you can kind of see on a month-to-month basis, and that'll pick out seasonality. It'll pick out, you know, if they're paying their insurance one big check every quarter, or if they're paying it monthly going across. So really rely upon your historical data to determine what your working capital needs are going to be. And also look at the aging schedules for your accounts receivable and accounts payable. And if they give you an accounts receivable aging and 50% of it is all 90 days past due, or the flip side of that, if their accounts payable aging schedule is everything 90 days past due, you know they haven't been paying their bills. And you know that that's probably not going to be a big thing to try to, or it's going to be a big thing trying to do going forward. So you want to do some financial modeling and say, okay, I want everybody to pay me within 45 days and I want to pay everybody else within 30 days. So you can do some modeling based upon that historical and come up with some really good planning for how much working capital you do need to fund the business in the short run. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
I think I'll just reiterate. I think the methodology that Dick is sharing here with the way he categorizes, like those numbers in green, those are your outflows. And then on the top side, you got your inflow coming in. I think that is definitely a big element of calculating the working capital you need for the business. And while you're still in negotiation, trying to set on terms and conditions for buying the business, you're going to use this same kind of methodology to look at the history to try to determine what that working capital coverage is going to need to be. And as I know it was discussed last time, there's multiple ways people think and calculate working capital, and that's always inevitably a point of discussion, not necessarily disagreement, but discussion during the final negotiations. But it is a very vital, important, because at the end of the day, as Dick started, cash is king. If you have no cash to pay a bill, in worst case, no cash to write a paycheck to an employee, you've got a problem with the business, plain and simple. And if the only primary source of your cash is the money you're getting from customers, that whole collection game, you want to be sure the collection and all your receivables are working as efficiently as possible and well within reason. I mean, there's different kinds of contracts these businesses get into, but if you're in a pure residential service business, you're probably getting paid on the day of delivery. The plumber goes out to the house. If you've got systems in place, you can take a credit card payment on the spot, have that ticket covered, and you're done. So your accounts receivable is zero because you just got paid. But other businesses are more contract based, and you've got installment payments and partial payments and all of incremental income collection that does take longer and is inevitably a function of time. So knowing all that by looking at the history is what helps drive your calculation of working capital needs.
And we've got one client that got a big contract from a commercial side. I thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it was a good contract for him. However, the contract payment on his end was tied to the bank releasing funds because it was a construction loan. And there was some things that he didn't do that another vendor did in there that tied up the advance being made from the bank. So he thought he was going to get $140,000 one day, and he didn't. And so, those kinds of things can come into play. And if you don't plan for that or know about it, it can be pretty scary.
Yep. Okay, any other questions, comments? No? Okay. Well, Dick and I will work to set this up in a shared drive that we can get out to everybody, and we'll send you a note when we've got that ready to go. But otherwise, anybody have any specific things they'd like to share about deals they may be looking at or questions they've encountered unrelated to cash flow and working capital?
Yeah, Doug, I'll jump in. It's always good to get smart on how these things work. That was a good presentation. Thanks for that. Finally came to agreement on a price for my business. We've been going back and forth. So we're going towards purchase agreement now. This is a game of inches. I wish things would go faster and smoother, but you wake up and every day it's either a small victory to celebrate or a problem to solve in this game. But we definitely have been going at this for about 7 months now, going on 8 months. So it's good to be on the other side of all the back and forth. What was interesting is that you could feel the tension between me and the seller during the back and forth on pricing. So once we came to agreement, I put together a little thank you note, a little letter of appreciation for getting to an agreement, and thank her for her professionalism and transparency through the process, because it can be fraught with a lot of emotion and so forth. But glad to be on this trajectory, and hopefully we get this thing closed in the next, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks or so.
Where are you, Mark, with the bank and the attorneys on final docs and all of that?
Yeah, I just kicked off the so got in contact with John Weiss, at least, through Rich, and I will say there's many value drivers of being with acquirer. This forum being one of the main ones of being smart with colleagues going through the same journey. But the referrals and the vendors are fantastic. I could have spent weeks shopping and interviewing attorneys, but referrals have been spot on and affordable and fair in the pricing. So really getting to value pretty quickly. So kicked off the agreement this morning. So I spent the first draft in a matter of days, trying to keep it as simple as possible with the seller. And one of the things I think is valuable is, like, since we were debating back and forth for about 2.5 weeks, the purchase agreement is pretty much written up because we've gone through all the drama ahead of time. So all of that, back and forth and hand wringing and teeth gnashing is going to save a boatload of attorney's fees on the back end. So that was helpful. But the bank's ready to go. The first draft should get us to credit letter, and we're looking for appraisal on the equipment on the manufacturing line, and then from there, setting a date.
Yeah, on the note of the legal support, the good news is on most of these deals and going the SBA route, all of the attorneys that we have in our referral network are very familiar, number one, with SBA and small business legal issues in general. So the ability to get an agreement pulled out, they are fundamentally kind of boilerplate templates that most of these attorneys are using. So you're not commissioning them to go write a brand new document from scratch, which would be hours and hours and hours of legal fees. You're getting a proven product in a template, and almost am reluctant to use the word template because it makes it sound like it ought to be even cheaper still, but it's still, the issue is that it's well tested and vetted in the markets. It's supportable by the SBA, and it does fast track and streamline. And reduce the legal fees in general as much as possible, because you can go out to an independent attorney and that might be a friend of a friend and get a deal done, but their chances are they're going to be writing it from scratch. They're going to be charging you for that, and your legal fee could be double what it might otherwise be. So just be cautious when you get to that stage of the game. Okay, anything else? We've got a few more minutes. If somebody's got something else they'd like to share or ask.
Hey, Doug, this is Luther.
I would-
So, go ahead.
No, I was just saying my only random thought here would be something that I've encountered. It's not the first time I've encountered this, but talking to one company now, electrical contractor, the broker has been spotty on communication, but I do like the opportunity. Numbers look good. They're working on wrapping up some of the 2024 numbers for me to take a look at now. Something, I guess where I'm looking at, especially in the market of South Florida, in these home services industries, is one of the things I'm realizing might be a challenge is just communication. A lot of these folks are Spanish speaking, and including the broker in this case. And I've noticed that even in our discussions that the communication barrier seems to be a bit of a hassle. And I suspect there's some breakdown and miscommunications going on there. So it's no real short-term fix for that, but I guess it just got me thinking might be time to start brushing back up on my Spanish that I haven't really used since high school. So.
Well, there is no denying the geographical nuances of what you might run into when you're looking at an opportunity. There is a very common, well talked about, call it urban legend or folklore in South Florida. If you don't know how to speak Spanish, you're probably not going to like living there.
I mean, I've worked with a lot of these guys, and I don't have any problem with it. They're usually, in my experience, some of the best guys, some of the best people down there, the best companies to work with are predominantly South American
totally,
Spanish speaking.
totally.
So it is something basically it is something that I've committed myself to at this point. It's like, well, if I'm serious about this, it probably would behoove me to brush back up on my language skills.
Well, my own colleagues at Acquira who happen to live in the Miami area, Alejandro and her husband, Alfonso, they tease me about being a South Texas guy, and my Spanish is terrible. But they, every time I get to see them, we have a joke about that. And it is a reality, though, all seriousness. It's something to be considered. We do have an AE who has just closed on a business, a landscaping company in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and a big preponderance of their staff speak Spanish, and he happens to know Spanish as a second language and is just fine with it. So he's been actually a welcome voice in the new transition. And it's been very smooth. We've got another AE who's bought a tree service, and his Spanish is not as good as it could be, but he's made a pledge and commitment to beef up on it and add that to his wheelhouse as well. So it's very much both an ethnic and a geographic consideration as you look at these businesses. And in a lot of cases with the trades, it's pretty undeniable. I mean, those are the folk that make up a large part of the workforce.
Yeah, I'm testing translation headphones.
Yeah. I've heard there's some good options out there for that. There's some pretty neat ones people have been talking about. Yep.
Hey, Doug, this is Luther. So you know how if you all the costs that you put into the acquisition of a business, right? So whether it's quality of earning studies or even like the ACE program, etc., right? Like, so for example, like those count towards your investment or your down payment, or how you consider it into the loan, right?
In a general word, yes. And the one caveat being it does depend on the SBA banker you're going to deal with. Most of them are open and willing to count that, and under the guide, they should be counting it. But we have heard on occasion people kind of pick and choose. They say, well, this one counts and this one doesn't, and da 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 da. And I know Alan Peterson at FIB, First Internet Bank, is very bullish on Acquira. He encouraged you to keep track and capture every penny you might pay us for services, because he will give credit on the equity ledger for that. The one quick idea to think about is, if you're new to this game, think about setting up your own separate entity sooner rather than later. You know, whether it's an LLC or a C corp. Get with your tax person and talk about the strategy to get the right answer on which one to do, but get it done sooner rather than later, and go ahead and put some personal money into that, so that you then can pay these due diligence fees out of that business account. And that way you'll have a very clean accounting of what got paid into equity.
That makes sense. And then is it true that if, let's say, you do a quality of running study for a particular deal, but the deal falls through, right? My understanding is that those costs can then be counted to the next deal that you look at, to some extent, from an equity perspective.
That's ultimately really going to count on the banker and how he's willing to take that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if you've done some work that you've paid for that's transferable from deal to deal, yeah, that would be a no-brainer. But if you spent some specific dollars for, something that's not transferable, they probably won't allow that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just keep I tell my clients to keep two pieces of paper. One's a use of funds and one's a source of funds. And at the end of the day, those two numbers have got a total. They've got to agree. And so just write down every time you spend money for an attorney or an accountant or an appraisal or an environmental study, because that all is going to count as the use of funds, and your sources are going to be your capital plus the loan plus anything else that's coming in as a source of funds.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's a way too to get full credit for actual out-of-pocket cash that you're putting into the deal. You know, you may go back to my example of creating your new entity. You may stand that up and go to the bank and say, I want to open a bank account. And the bank will say, well, I need $1,000 to open the account. Okay, fine. You can do that today, but then, next month you might go ahead and put 50,000 in that account so that you can start paying some of these service bills. But again, to Dick's point, that 1,000 plus the 50 becomes a source of funds that you've put in. So you want credit for the full 51 when the time comes. And having it broken out like Dick described is a great way to document it for the banker. All right. Well, I think we're about up on time. Thanks everybody for sitting in. For those of you that are brand new to us, I hope this was helpful and you get a little bit of flavor of how these run. On one hand, despite the great talent that Dick is, this is a pretty typical call for us. But we always do try to have some sort of guest speaker as much as possible. And then we'll have the open discussion as we've done today. But for now, we're going to say goodbye and hope to see everybody again next week.